Well, hello, and thanks so much for joining us for Transforming Public Apathy to Revitalize Engagement. We're so thrilled that this topic has engaged so many of you folks. We have over 1,200 registrants for today's webinar, and we're just thrilled with the program today. Hi, I'm Dave Biggs. I am the Chief Engagement Officer here at MetroQuest, and I'm going to be your host today. And I'm happy to introduce our co-presenter, who I'm just thrilled to have on the webinar today. Hopefully you'll enjoy the program. We're going to cover a couple of topics. We're gonna look at some common barriers to engagement that you should avoid. We're gonna also talk mostly about how to increase public participation for planning projects. We're gonna specifically focus on areas where you can engage traditionally underrepresented populations with an eye to building support for plans going forward from the community. So really, here at MetroQuest, we truly believe that planners are the unsung heroes of our community. They do so much that affects the quality of life of our communities in terms of housing, in terms of traffic and traffic congestion, providing for mobility choices like transit, providing for comfortable and safe alternatives like cycling and pedestrian infrastructure, park space, and essentially making major decisions in terms of how tax dollars are spent on big infrastructure projects. And so it's puzzling to us that public engagement, for the most part, looks like this today. We have a special name for the usual suspects that show up to public meetings. We call them the STP. That stands for the same 10 people. I'm told that the average participation in a public meeting is now down to 9 people. So we might have to look for a new acronym. But the point here is it's a very small and self-selected group that tends to participate, which is puzzling because many of these decisions are going to dramatically affect the majority of people's quality of life. So it's kind of puzzling. There's this mismatch. Here are huge decisions being made, and it's very, very difficult to get people to participate in things that affect themselves so dramatically. We have the luxury of being working with a variety of different planning agencies as well as public participation associations, looking across the industry in terms of best practices. So that gives us a great vantage point to kind of see what's working and what's not, and to draw conclusions on best practices and try to give you bits and pieces of those in webinars like this. Now, in a recent survey that we ran with over 400 agencies, we asked them what their most important challenges were with respect to public participation. And the number one challenge, by an order of magnitude above the other challenges, was lack of participation, poor participation. And here are some actual quotes that were written in by the respondents from agencies across the country. And so we'd hear repeatedly things like, we just have no visibility or very little visibility into what the public feels about these things because of low levels of involvement. Other quotes, one of the biggest challenges is getting a decent representation of the population. People are talking about the narrow demographic that tends to get involved all the time and missing. So again, with the blinders on, it's really, really nerve-wracking as agencies to make these decisions with those blind spots. And so it drew our attention to asking ourselves some tough questions about, are agencies creating obstacles? So here's some fun obstacles from the transportation world where we spend a lot of our focus here in MetroQuest. So are we putting obstacles in place for the public to get involved? And so that brought us to one of our favorite speakers on the topic. I don't know how many of you have seen Dave Meslin's TED Talk, but over 1.7 million people have viewed that TED Talk. And so we're thrilled today to have as my co-presenter Dave Meslin on the line, who has really, more than anybody else that we have seen, managed to turn the questions of public engagement into something really captivating. And I think he's really got a great handle on the kinds of barriers that we're talking with. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave now, and he's going to talk to us about some of the barriers that he's seen. So Dave, I'm going to hand it over to you. Are you there?
Hello, everyone. Is that working?
It's working. Great. Great to see you, Dave.
Great to see you. Thanks for inviting me, and great to see hundreds of people joining us on this webinar. My background actually was as a municipal activist, one of those angry people who show up at the microphone. And I spent about 10 years of my life working on specific issues around sustainable transportation, bike lanes, issues around the commercialization of public spaces and billboards. But I took a step back about 10 years ago because it dawned on me that the people I was working with, my activist colleagues, were part of this strange fringe subculture. And I lived in a city of 3 million people. I'm based here in Toronto, but I would see the same faces over and over again at every public meeting. And it occurred to me that as much as I enjoyed doing it and I respected my activist colleagues, it seemed to represent a broken democracy. Because I would think about my mom, my sister, friends from high school, people who are smart, intelligent, caring, but were completely disengaged from the processes that are designed to help them shape their lives. And I felt that if I really want to see a better world, what I can do as a leader isn't focus on my personal activism, but help shift our society towards a culture of participation where regular, ordinary people can have their voice heard. Because I think regular, ordinary people, when they're removed from, binary, partisan environments, when they can sit down and actually talk with people and become informed, there's a reasonable side to everyone that can be lured out of them. And we're almost conditioned to be combative and to operate in hostile political environments where people only tend to show up when they're angry. And I think that's a real shame because there is a human capacity to listen and learn and collaborate. But a poorly designed political system will bring out our worst, and a good designed political system will bring out our best. And I think currently we're bringing out our worst in terms of who's being elected, in terms of how elected people treat each other, and how the public feels about politicians, and to be honest, how the public behaves as well. We've kind of devolved into this toxic environment where people are either involved in an angry way or voting for the most angry people, or more often not participating at all, either not voting and definitely not showing up to typical public consultation meetings. Dave mentioned the acronym STP, same 10 people. As I've been traveling around Canada, I've been hearing different versions of this. Another very popular one is CAVE people, Citizens Against Virtually Everything. And here in Toronto, we just call them the usual suspects. But there really is a kind of negative connotation of who tends to show up at a town hall, who's the first to get to the microphone. And to be fair, that's not an assumption based on fantasy. There is a group of angry people. But what I think happens is if you have a system that's designed to be very uninviting, then those who show up are the ones who are the craziest and the angriest. And I confess guilt that I've been a part of both of those populations at times. Someone like me is always going to know what's on an agenda. I've invested. I'm a geek. I'm a political geek, and I do get angry about issues. I get angry about the environment. I get angry about lack of bicycle infrastructure because I ride my bike, and I've learned how to navigate the system. So I know when a meeting is happening. I know where to be. I know how the agenda works. I know how many minutes I'm allowed to speak for, and I'm going to make my voice heard. The average person doesn't understand how the system works. They don't know when the meetings are. They don't know where they are. So you just end up with the hyper engaged, which often means people who are angry. I'm going to share a quick story. I was involved with a really fun project in my neighborhood 2 years ago about painting road murals on the street. I'm going to show some slides in a few minutes about that. And the idea was that instead of just putting murals on garage doors and in alleyways and the type of public art projects you've probably seen to reclaim a neighborhood and replace graffiti with art, why not do it on the road? That's a Beatles song, actually. Why don't we do it on the road? And so we started painting murals on the road in our neighborhood, which was so much fun. We got kids involved, and then we asked the city for permission to do it, and the city said, sorry, there's no permit process for this. You aren't allowed to do it. So we did it anyways because we knew that they were being done legally in Halifax, in St. John's, I believe, in Kitchener, in Vancouver. And then our city councillor, liked it so much that he put forward a motion saying, why don't we legalize this and give people permits? City staff again came back and said, no, we don't recommend this. So I organized a few of my neighbors to get involved and send in written deputations to staff explaining how positive it was for the neighborhood. And one person in particular, Melissa Frew, I encouraged her to actually come to a city hall meeting, which again, for me is something I do every week. She had never been to City Hall. She was intimidated by the idea of going to City Hall and speaking in front of councillors. But I said, listen, they'll dismiss my voice because I'm one of the SDP. I'm one of the cave. I'm one of the usual suspects. You're a regular, hockey mom. You live in the neighborhood. You've gotten involved with the project. You're not a usual suspect. Your voice will really carry a lot of weight if you show up to the meeting. She said, okay, I'll make time in my day. I'll show up. Where is City Hall? Which room is it in? How does it work? I gave her some background and some training on how to give an effective deputation. So I'm sitting in the committee meeting, and our item is about to come up on the agenda, and she's not there. So I text her and I say, Melissa, what's going on? You said you were going to show up. And she writes back and said, Dave, I came to City Hall. I found the committee room meeting, but the door was closed, and I wasn't sure if I was allowed in. Now, again, we have different levels of confidence and familiarity with the process. I know that you're allowed to open the door. I'm also a very confident white male who feels a sense of ownership over the system and over my world. And if a door is closed, I just open it. She didn't know if she would be disrupting the meeting, if it was her place as a citizen to open up a committee room door when it's closed. Luckily, I caught her in time. I said, Melissa, of course you can open the door. Come back, we need you. She came back, she spoke, and we won the debate, and city staff now have created a beautiful program for road-based murals in Toronto. But here's the thing. Go to a mall, a big shopping mall in your city, and find me a store that has closed doors. The first thing every retail business does, except in the middle of the winter if you're outdoors, the first thing you do at opening hours is you open the door, because an open door sends a message that we want you to come in, and a closed door doesn't, which is why stores open their doors. So I've got a book coming out in the spring about democracy, and in a kind of tongue-in-cheek way, I talk about how government needs to be run more like a business, not in the typical right-wing way where that just means let's cut our costs on everything nilly-willy, but there are things we can learn from the private sector in terms of what we call user experience, and I can run through a few quick examples. So food. You go to a lot of stores these days and they're actually handing out free food. Even this is a jewelry store that's handing out free popcorn. That's a hardware store on the left handing out free popcorn. There's grocery stores now that have free fruit for kids. But if you show up at a city council meeting in Toronto, not only they're not serving snacks, but there's actually signs up saying, you can't eat. You can't eat in this room. You can't drink in this room, which is absurd because there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to eat in a meeting. I mean, to suggest that eating food would somehow be disruptive is crazy, because what's disruptive is the councillors yelling at each other like children. To suggest that it's going to make a mess is ridiculous, because movie theaters figure out how to clean up thousands of pieces of popcorn every day, every 2 hours after the end of each movie. Surely a city hall can find it in their budgets to purchase a vacuum cleaner. These are the basic things that might seem small to you, but they add up cumulatively to a culture of alienation and hostility. This goes to things like not allowing people to clap in the council chambers, not having timed items where people know when their agenda item is going to appear, so they have to wait all day. No one would go see a movie if they didn't know what time it was going to start, but that's exactly what we do with our city hall agendas. It goes to having good signage, using language that is accessible, et cetera, et cetera. The more you can do to make the environment inclusive, inviting, comfortable, convenient, offering childcare. If you go to IKEA, you can drop off your kids for an hour in a room full of puzzles and books and plastic balls. If you want to go to a public meeting, though, you often have to either drag your kid along, etc. Businesses do this automatically because they're always thinking about user experience. We want to get people in the door. So part of what I'm encouraging you to do is you're probably to some degree fearful of having people come in the door because of your experience and with the angry people who show up. So my pitch to you is, if we could increase the number of people who show up at public meetings, it won't be a increase of angry people. It'll be the exact opposite. If we can make the systems more inclusive, we will drown out those angry voices in a larger pool of sanity and normal people who just want to listen and be heard. So, but it does take a bit of a rewiring of your process, because I think most city councils, city halls, municipalities aren't really investing resources and thought into how do we get more people in the door. And if they were, some of these solutions would just arise automatically. Again, no business would ever close their door in the morning or not allow people to bring food in for no reason. Yet these are normal practices in city halls. I'll give you another quick example here. This is from my TED Talk, so some of you might have seen this before. This is a standard notice of applications that probably looks similar to whatever city you're in. It's bureaucratic, it's boring, it's full of jargon, there's no color, there's no images, it's hard to understand. I'm quite sure that no ordinary member of the public has ever, in the history of public notices, read one of these and then shown up to a meeting in a constructive way because of this notice. In fact, a notice like this almost guarantees that only the craziest people will show up, because no normal person would or should read a notice like this. So in my TED Talk, I kind of go through the parts of this that are alienating, the fact that you have to get halfway down to even find out what address they're talking about in tiny font. They're not even using very affordable technology such as bold or underline to highlight that there's an address that they're talking about. And then, of course, way at the bottom, again, totally buried, how to actually have your voice heard. And I asked the audience in my TED Talk to imagine how ridiculous it would look if the private sector advertised in the same way. If Nike had a new pair of shoes and they put an ad that looked like this on a billboard or in a magazine, this would be a normal ad for Nike to put up if they hired the same people who designed the public notices in Toronto. Of course, you'll never see an ad like this for a pair of shoes, because Nike actually wants you to buy their shoes. So I showed in the TED Talk what a better version could look like. And I also, I've been talking to people about the use of jargon and how just the simplest words that might seem normal to an engineer or a planner can really turn someone off, because it's not the kind of word they would use. Even here, you can see right in the middle of this sign, a statutory public meeting. The quickest way to make sure people don't show up to a public meeting is to call it a statutory public meeting, because it sounds like you don't even want to have it. You're being forced to have it by some state or provincial guidelines. If I invited you to my statutory birthday party, if you look at this sign here, I've circled all the words and phrases that are totally inaccessible to the average person. What the heck is a mechanical penthouse? Podium, at grade, below grade, an exterior amenity space, bylaw number 43886. No one knows what these things are. So if these aren't words that you can use with ordinary people, you shouldn't be using them on a public notice. A four-story podium for most people is something that looks like this, right? People don't know that a podium is a large base that stands underneath a tower. So they're going to imagine a four-story podium and think that the city planners have completely lost their mind. 4 levels of below grade parking just sounds like crappy parking. I want high grade parking in my neighborhood. So what I did is I did a call out asking designers across Canada to show what a public notice should look like, prioritizing good design, highlighting the most important information, clearly highlighting the points of opportunity for engagement for the public, and most importantly, some kind of proactive call to action, a pitch. We want to hear from you. Your voice matters. And people started sending me from all across Canada. I've never even met these people, but these random designers started sending me these great designs that just show you what city notices would look like if they were behaving like Nike instead of the other way around, like I showed. Lots of color, have your say, lots of exclamation marks, also a very affordable technology you can use. Here's another one. And then I got this one. This one was the most exciting for me, not because it's the most beautiful, but because this wasn't from a random designer. This was from the village of Pemberton. They saw my TED Talk. They saw all of these other images that I just showed you on my blog, and they actually redesigned their public notice based on my designs, or sorry, based on those designs that were sent in. So my TED Talk was actually having an impact in the real world, which was really exciting for me. In fact, the National Post wrote a story about it, which on the one hand was exciting because here's my work making a difference in the world. On the other hand, how sad is it that we've reached a point where when a government just does their job, which is trying to communicate with people, it's a headline, right? Imagine a headline that says, Nike tried to sell their shoes, or your garbage got picked up yesterday. When municipalities trying to get people to read public notice is headline worthy, we know we're in big trouble. Anyways, I wanted to make the Pemberton's efforts contagious. So I created an award called the Dazzling Notice Award, which was kind of a fake award, to be honest. I just printed it on my own laser printer, bought a $20 frame, flew up to Pemberton, and they were thrilled to get it, which shows the power of fake awards. And then it was called the Dazzling Notice Award. And within weeks, I started getting emails from all across Canada from other municipalities saying, when do nominations open for the next round of the Dazzling Notice Awards? So I started handing out more awards for the next few years. Vancouver got one. There's a before and after for their design. Here's a city of Ottawa. And here's another one. Like, wow, look at the difference here, night and day. Not that the one on the right deserves an A+. I'd say it's a C, but to go from an F to a C is a baby step we need to see happening. I did start to get worried that I would get exposed as a distributor of fraudulent awards. So I've now teamed up with IAP2, the International Association of Public Participation Professionals, and we now every year we'll be handing out these awards together, and you can learn more at our websites, dazzleawards.ca. I'm going to walk you through one more quick example here of just how easy it is to forget how exclusive a system can become, because I don't think these things are intentional. It's not as if someone added in that complex jargon to turn people away. But if you're an engineer or a planner or an architect, then the word podium or below grade is normal English for you. You don't even realize that you're being exclusionary. But part of the process of developing good user experience, and this is what companies do, is you run things by outsiders. You have focus groups of ordinary people to say, does this make sense to you? Does this excite you? Does this do you connect with this content? And here's another example of how ridiculous this can get when you're not putting yourself in the shoes of someone outside the system who isn't a planner, who isn't an engineer, who isn't a public participation expert, and who isn't an activist like myself. So this is a building on the corner of 2 streets in Halifax. You can see there's some very clear signage of what these businesses are. It's a plaza, there's a Dollarama, there's a Booster Juice. This is another corner, the northeast corner, Obviously, there's a restaurant and a hotel. We know that because the companies have invested time and resources to explain to people that they're there and they want you to come in, and the doors are probably open. Here's a bank. We know it's a bank because of the beautiful, clear sign with nice colors, exciting fonts, backlit. It's put up high. And then we got this building on the southwest corner. Could be a courthouse, could be a prison, could be a museum, and of course, it could be a city hall, which it is. It didn't seem to occur to anyone to put a sign up telling people it's a city hall, because if you work at city hall, you know it's city hall. If you care about municipal governance, you probably know it's city hall, and it might not even occur to you that there should be a sign, because to you, it's obvious. And of course, when this building was constructed, it was the tallest building in the entire east coast of Canada. But at this point, it's completely lost and surrounded by development. And I can tell you that I've stood there asking residents as they walk by, do you know where City Hall is? And Halifax residents have looked at me standing underneath these big stone walls saying, yeah, I think it's around here somewhere, but I'm not sure. And we're literally standing there. Now, to be fair, there is a sign, Halifax City Hall, and there it is, which looks pretty good, except I photoshopped that. That's not where the sign is. The sign does look like this, but I encourage you to spend a few seconds trying to see if you can locate the sign. It's actually in this picture. It's not that big one there. If you see the person on the left by the street light, there's a circle. That's the sign they chose to put up. We'll contrast that with the signs we saw for the bank and for the mall. The sign is about the size of my hand. Secondly, you literally can't find the entrance to this building. It's obscured on the south side of the building away from the main street. And if you walk around the building trying to find the door, you find doors that look like this. And again, if you know where the entrance is, no problem. You walk to the entrance. When I first tried to find my way into this building, I found this door. I found this door. I found these doors. They were locked. And everyone had a camera, but none of them had a doorbell or an explanation of how to get in. This one, which literally looks like a jail. This one, telling me I can't smoke, but not telling me how to get in. Another security camera. This one, a dirty alleyway with garbage and a sign saying, keep away. You can be badly hurt or killed. Welcome to City Hall. And then here's an entrance here, which you can finally find once you've left the main road, and there's this little obscure entrance to City Hall, and you'll see two signs there, which again, I have photoshopped in. Those signs, even those little signs aren't there. The only signs at the entrance to City Hall are authorized parking only and no skateboarding. Once you finally actually find the entrance and get in, you hit a security guard who can tell you how to find your way to the right room. After he asks you, how the hell did you find the door? He's probably shocked that anyone has found their way in. Now, again, I'm not suggesting for a second that people in City Hall have put any thought or time into intentionally making the building hard to navigate. And of course, they all know where the door is, and they've never had to go through that process of walking around the building to figure out how to get in. But all they had to do was hire a user experience professional who would have told them right away, you need signage, you need wayfinding tools, and this building is unfriendly. And again, you will never find a business where it appears on a Google map, but then when you arrive at the business, you can't find the front door because they never put up a sign. So this stuff isn't rocket science. Anyone who is actively thinking about how do I get customers in my door, they'll figure these things out. So it really raised the question, how much resources have been allocated by governments and municipalities to get people in the door? And I think that's what we're lacking. It's the proactive thought process around, okay, we know a few angry people are showing up. How come no one else is? Maybe it's something we're doing. I'm just going to run through a quick themes, and then I'm going to pass it back over to Dave. We also need to look at the lack of education around civics and governance, federal, state level, provincial, and municipal. People won't engage in a system if they don't understand how it works. And we often teach civics maybe as a half credit in one grade. It really doesn't scratch the surface. And people grow up to be honest, being confused about the difference between three levels of government. I hear stories all the time from people campaigning for election, and they're knocking on doors for a federal election, and the questions they get are about province, state, and municipal, or vice versa. So if people don't even know the difference between a state legislature and a city hall, there's no way they're going to start showing up to meetings in a constructive way. So I just want to suggest a few ideas, especially if you work in government. We really need to boost the amount of civics education for kids first. And I'll just mention for kids, one of the best examples I've seen is City Hall School, which exists in both Calgary and Edmonton, Alberta. Big classrooms in City Hall where kids come in for a whole week and they do immersive hands-on education, meeting with city councilors, meeting with staff, and learning how the process works. And I've met with these kids and they come out of it just like their minds are blown. They had no idea that there was a process there that they could participate in as adults, but even perhaps as kids. Here's some quotes that I got from kids. Just spend 20 seconds reading those, and then imagine the likelihood of these kids participating when they're older compared to kids who hadn't gone through this program. Of course, we can't just focus on kids. We have to develop training programs. There has to be free courses that adults can take in every city about the planning process, the budget process, the committee structure. We have hardware stores here in Toronto called Home Depot. I think that's an international brand, so you've probably heard of Home Depot. They offer free courses every Saturday where you can come and learn how to use tools and do tiling and fix a sink, because they know that if you know how your tools work, you're more likely to buy them and use them. The same thing goes for governance. If we want people to show up, we should be offering free courses. And the last two things I want to mention is about bringing it to the local. Cities are growing and growing and growing. And as our cities halls represent more and more and more people in the millions now, it makes government feel more distant. And the bigger your municipality is, the more you'll have to bend over backwards to create opportunities to make decision-making feel bite-sized. And I'll just show you two mathematical formulas I would encourage you to look at for your municipality. So one is the number of residents per councillor. And Toronto's is really bad right now. And in fact, we just cut our council in half, which was something forced upon us by the provincial government. So now it's even half of this. It's 1 per 100,000. So do the math for yours and see where you're at. And the other is civic bodies per 100,000 residents. And what cities can do here when they grow too big is to create a fourth level of government underneath, a community board, a neighborhood council, a borough council. Sometimes they're elected, sometimes they're appointed. But the more distant you feel from City Hall, geographically and politically, the less likely you'll participate. Most importantly, my final comments are about how people need to feel connected to their community and feel that they have something to contribute to the world beyond the boundaries of their own home. Everyone invests their time and their money and their thoughts into their rooms, their kitchens, their bathrooms, their front lawn. So it's not as if people aren't willing to invest to make their surroundings better. It's that they tend to have a mental barrier that investment ends at the curb. As soon as people are doing stuff collaboratively, even in their neighborhood, it'll rewire their brains in a way that gets them to realize that they can invest outside their homes, and that is addictive and that is contagious. So what I've been focusing on is hyper-local neighborhood engagement. And I'll just give you two quick examples quickly. This one here was a project I did in my neighborhood where there was an intersection that a bunch of us felt was too dangerous and too wide. And we got together just with some chalk and paint and redesigned it on our own using leaves to fill in the excess space, keeping the curb widths consistent, and then doing a before and after photograph, which then went viral all across the world. And now we're working with city staff to permanently redesign the intersection. We also did a project last year tapping maple sugar trees in our neighborhood. So we just drilled some holes in the trees, collected the sap, and then all these people got involved boiling the sap in their own homes. And we did public boil downs on the streets as well. And then we ended up with our own Regal Heights maple syrup, and every volunteer got their own bottle. This might seem unrelated to political engagement, but it's not, because if you don't know the names of your neighbors and you've never done anything collaborative outside your house, you're just less likely to imagine yourself showing up to any type of public meeting, because you essentially spend time either with your friends or at work or in your house. It really is a different lens to see the world as this blank slate that you can engage with and interact with, and small neighborhood projects can do that. Here's those street murals I was talking about earlier. So here you've got kids literally, physically taking ownership over something outside of their homes, not just putting their artwork up on their parents' fridge, putting artwork up on their street. They know now that's my street. I can change it. And you combine that with the education they learn in City Hall School, and they'll have a sense of empowerment that I can participate in how the world is designed around me. Those are the kinds of people you want at meetings, not people who are just angry about something, but want to improve it. Here's some more quick photographs. That's my son there on the left. There's the final product. It's a tattoo. It's not just a street party like neighborhoods do, which is gone the next day. It's an actual physical change that these kids, every time they walk by, they'll say, I did that. I can change my neighborhood. So in summary, people will engage constructively, not just angrily, if they have these 5 things. If they trust the system, so we have to overcome people's cynicism towards government, which begins with government getting over their cynicism of people. If they understand the process, no one's going to show up to a meeting if they don't understand how these meetings work. They'll feel intimidated. They'll be worried about embarrassing themselves. And again, the angry people will always show up, but regular people won't. Number 3, if they feel comfortable and respected, the same way we do when we walk into a store, and the whole process has been designed for us to make us feel comfortable and wanted. Number 4, if they already feel connected to their communities and have a sense of, or a culture and habits of participation. And last, that they've developed participatory skills. You can't expect someone to go from never doing something collaborative in their community to suddenly showing up at a community meeting that you're hosting and participating constructively. You have to learn these skills, and they're foreign to most people. There's a lot of really important policy issues coming down the pipe around immigration, around environment, around you name it. And I think we'll end up with the best policies if we can get ordinary people to show up and participate. And I think you can all play a big role in helping create that culture of participation. And with that, I'll pass it back over to Dave. Thank you so much for your attention.
Well, thank you so much, Dave Meslin. That was so exciting, and exactly the kind of messaging that I was excited about presenting to this audience. It really echoes a lot of the research that we have done into some of these challenges. All right, so barriers are essentially participation filters, and really Dave Meslin did a great job talking about it. Let me give you a metric of what that looks like. People have a range of attitudes, and about any particular topic or any agency, people are going to have, be positive, moderate, negative, right across the spectrum. It dramatically affects people's level of motivation to engage with planning topics of any kind. And it turns out that Maslow was right. The best motivators are anger or fear. And we tend to see that the people that are most able to overcome all of the barriers that might be in place to participate in planning projects are the ones that are most negative. And so if you feel like the community's against you, maybe you've just filtered out the rest of the community, inadvertently with some barriers. And so it's really, with our work with MetroQuest and with the comments that Dave Meslin was making, we're really trying to focus on lowering the barriers as much as possible to get the people that are across the spectrum, all opinions and all walks of life. Now, there is a little bit of level of motivation. People who are strongly positive are more motivated, but the vast majority of people are kind of in the middle, kind of moderate, and relatively unmotivated to, get off their couch and tell you that they think you're doing an okay job and they've got some ideas. So I want to just talk about some barriers that we've seen repeatedly. People are just too busy to participate. And so, there's a real time pressure around things. And when you look at things like public meetings, the time commitment is great. So one of the cures that we've seen across multiple case studies is offering people an opportunity to participate at their own convenience online. So giving people options to weighing in without having to get out of their house and come and see you. And that has led many agencies to look at online techniques like social networking or creating online forums or doing online surveys. So I'm going to focus more on those online aspects because that's really where we live here at MetroQuest. Number two barrier, a lot of this kind of online, even online work, but certainly face-to-face at public meetings, a lot of it is just too public and too intimidating for people. There's so many opportunities for people to become embarrassed or, to suffer conflict, even when it's social networking or online forums. I just grabbed this as an example of a recent project using an online forum, and you get things like this happening all the time. This is an ongoing, this is just a clip of a very long argument where two people with their name exposed to the community are, that's not true, but you're wrong, you're ill-informed, back and forth. And meanwhile, the agency is learning nothing about what the public feels about critical issues, but these two people are having it out. And so a lot of this is unproductive, but also it's very intimidating for somebody else to weigh in with an opinion because it's so public. So the cure there is to create an opportunity for people to be able to participate that feels safe and private, so people can register their views without fear of being ridiculed or pressured or being essentially biased by other people's opinions. Now, a lot of examples that we've looked at are using online surveys. This is a great example of an online survey. Now, a lot of the surveys that we've seen tend to be a little bit boring, maybe a lot boring. Certainly, many of them are very long. This is 7 and I don't know how many questions that are out there. But just look at the language that's being used here. And Dave Meslin talked about this as well. The public just don't live in the planning world, so they don't understand what TOD is. And now we, as people in the planning world, know it as transit-oriented design, but people certainly don't think about zoning or land use or density on a daily basis. The usual sort of, public participants don't think in these worlds. And so the cure is really that we found with MetroQuest is the need to combine education with the survey process. And what we found to be very effective is gamification. So turning it into a fun exercise where people are able to play around with something interactive and contribute their opinions, but they're being educated at the same time almost by accident. So, playing around with different budget games or looking at different scenarios or creating, an exercise where they have to balance the budget. These are fun exercises which can also teach people a lot about real trade-offs without kind of, overextending the assumption that they understand what the policy issues are. The barrier number 4 that I wanted to raise is a lot of even online activities are just too time consuming. Now, when we're very, very honest about the level of time commitment that most people, the vast majority of people, are willing to put in, it turns out to be about 5 minutes. So obviously, a public meeting is just off the table for the vast majority of people. And it's interesting how sensitive people are to this. When you ask for 7 minutes or 10 minutes, the participation drops so dramatically that it's not worth it to limit your audience that greatly. So we found that 5 minutes is about the sweet spot. So you better do all you can to make that 5 minutes really worthwhile. And pictures, use 1,000 words, goes a long way to help speed that process up. Barrier number 5, it just can feel to the average person like homework. Sifting through reams and reams of text and reading this and reading that, or online forums which are just so laborious for most people that are just looking for a quick way to have their say, or surveys that go on and on. So it's important to respect the timid people that are participating, and they're sort of easily distracted. It's important to make it as fun and visual as possible to keep their attention, because you sort of think of them as just being steps away from going somewhere else. And so the more you can do to make it fun and visual, we found that to pay off so dramatically. Barrier number 6 is I can't tell you how many projects that we looked at across the spectrum that just had no really effective promotional strategy. Now, I didn't want to embarrass any project team, so I'm just making the point generically. It's really, really important to get those promotions right. And I would encourage you as a cure to try to be playful and have a little bit of fun with it. People are looking for a little bit of entertainment and looking to be lured in. And I've got an example that I'm going to show you now that I just thought just hit it out of the park. They were conducting a planning process for the city of Nashville, and they created this little brand called All Right Nashville, It's Time to Pick. And they played with it. They had these little postcards that they sent out online and printed out. And so they played off this idea, All Right Nashville, It's Time to Pick. And all you had to do was click on one of these things and it would take you to the online survey. And it was about picking the future of what you want Nashville to be in the next 20 or 30 years. And so it was a great way to kind of lure people in. So they had this little guy, they had this little girl, another metaphor on picking, and then this one is the one that just when it completely went viral. So you can imagine how difficult it must have been for the planning and engagement team to go to the decision makers at the city and say, this is the campaign that we want to put forward. I mean, you can see that there's a lot of people that might be nervous about this, but they had fun with it, and the decision to do it was so well rewarded, because we were watching here at MetroQuest the participation, and it just spiked one day, and we had to contact them. What happened? They said, we released this photo right here, and it just went through the roof. People were loving it, sharing it on social media, and all of a sudden people who would normally not participate were finding out about it, clicking on it, and away they went. So have some fun with your promotions, be a little tongue-in-cheek and play with it. You're dealing with people that are spending their spare time with you. So again, those barriers that I talked about and Dave talked about were really about trying to lower the barrier to participation dramatically in order to engage the full spectrum of population that you need to. So I wanted to show you just a few examples from our own portfolio to show you what this could like in the online world. And now Dave talked about some of the signage and face-to-face kind of activities. In the online world, I wanted to celebrate some of the successful sites that we've seen from our customers that really, I think, got this right in terms of making it fast and fun and educational, all bundled into a package that takes about 5 minutes. So this was a project for a bridge replacement. So not exactly the most exciting topic for most people, but as you'll see, the participation numbers were fantastic. They did a great job of making bridge replacement interesting for people. They started with a question that I think is the most important question. What's important to you about this bridge? And so people can go in here and they can say, here's my top priorities for this bridge. So it just gets people thinking about what's most important about that. And then they hit them with something that planners take for granted, that the public has no idea of, that every design has pros and cons, that there's trade-off decisions to be made. So they had this screen, which engaged people specifically on difficult trade-off choices that planners were facing. Is it more important to move cars or move people? Where would you put yourself on that spectrum? Because we can't have everything. We've got to focus in a variety of areas. How would you deal with views or the role of the bridge? What do you think is the most important role? So these things are important to get people thinking that we need to make some critical choices. And then they got really specific. They started talking about, okay, here's some examples of how we could design landscaping or deal with lighting or deal with public spaces, and allowing people to weigh in on what they think about these different designs. So it creates this collaborative feel where people are co-creating this alternative. And then, of course, the last screen, you can ask people some demographic questions so you know who you're hearing from. Keep in touch with us by leaving your email address and so forth. I'll show you some other quick examples. This one I thought was fantastic because they were allowing people to kind of get something off their chest, which is important and cathartic for people. So, for example, where are safety issues? Where does bicycle improvement need to be improved? So allowing people to zoom and pan and put issues right on the map is important for people because they feel like they're contributing their own ideas to the process. This I thought was fantastic, where they were having some budgeting challenges around this this transportation plan, and they engaged people in how would they raise the funds in order to balance the budget. So here we can play around with these and figure out, okay, we can learn along the way of which of these levers is more or less powerful, and then we can balance the budget. What you're doing is you're learning a lot and you're contributing your ideas on how this might take place. And speaking of learning, I think this example here was excellent in terms of giving people some very complex information about scenarios and helping people reflect on against their own top priorities, how do each of these alternatives perform? So this one performs kind of a mixed bag on my top priorities. This alternative here does very poorly on my two top priorities. This alternative here, excellent on my top priorities, but there is a trade-off. And so what you're doing there is you're teaching people about pros and cons before they weigh in. So when I say, yep, I love that scenario, I'm aware that there's a trade-off, but these benefits are worth it for me. So I thought the average person spends 2 or 3 minutes on a screen like this. That 2 or 3 minutes gets you a lot of learning from the public before you engage them in what would they do. This is another example that I thought was very powerful by giving people actual infrastructure that they could build and showing them how much it costs and giving them a budget where they can spend up to the budget of $100 million on specific infrastructure projects. And all of a sudden, you know, they're going to discover very quickly what we can't build everything. What do we have to focus on? And then this last one is another game related to cost where you can allow people to, for example, put your discretionary budget in a variety of categories. And of course, I'm going to get to the same point that you get to. We don't have enough money to go around. We have to focus on areas, and they all of a sudden feel a little bit more empathy towards what planners are dealing with by going through that exercise, but also they can contribute their own ideas to it. So I wanted to show you those examples just to show you in the online world how it doesn't have to be boring, it doesn't have to be time consuming for you to educate people and get some rich information back. And I showed you some of these examples. This one that I talked about, the Belmont Bridge project, there's only a population of 46,000 people in this community, and they had 30,000 images that were rated. And so the idea of broad engagement, even with a small population base, I can't imagine how many people would have shown up at the public meeting, but you know, really game changing about that. You know, when we look at what difference it makes, I think the types of responses back are, you know, obviously it's important to engage more people, but it's also important to communicate back to the community how their input affected the outcomes. And I think we hear this quite often. It gave courage to the elected officials to have all this input. And really, when it comes down to it, it's about getting your plans approved. And there's a variety of things that that sum up to get your plans approved. You need all of these things to be in place. Increase participation from a broad demographic, but you also need to make sure that you've got this informed input and that it's quantifiable. And that hopefully leads to much better decision making and greater public support and improved quality of life for people. So I'm going to pop open a poll before we open it up for Q&A. I'm going to pop open a quick poll, and just because there might be a variety of information that we weren't able to get to, specifically, I can offer you more information about MetroQuest, but not here in a separate forum. So what kind of information can we help you with that you would like? So we've got a variety of choices here. You can pick any of these that make sense for you, that you're curious about more information about MetroQuest pricing, or if you've got things that you want to do online and you're curious about features or functionality and capabilities. Would you like, do you have an idea of what kind of public participation you're doing, and would you like some information about how you can maybe move the needle a little bit? So feedback on your plans and approaches, or would you want some information, case studies about how online participation is being used? Any of those that interest you, I'll give you a few more seconds to weigh in, and then we will turn it over for our Q&A. Thank you for that. So I'm going to send you, in the follow-up, I'm going to send you a book that I just created on 21 tips to detox public engagement. So if you are facing contention in your projects, there's some strategies that we found to be effective in terms of detoxifying that environment. I also want to let you know that we will be sending you notification when Dave Meslin's next book is available. We're anticipating in the spring. We'll send you a notification of when it's available and how you can receive it. With that, I'm going to turn it over to you for questions. We just have a few minutes left, but if you do have a little bit of extra time, hopefully we can stick around for a few more extra minutes and answer questions. So we've already got quite a few questions coming in. Dave, are you there? Yeah, there you are. Excellent. So let's get to our Q&A. All right. So here's a question. I'm unsure about our city council trying some of these new ideas. Any advice, ideas, examples to get local government buy-in? So Dave Meslin, would you like to take a crack at that? How do you develop government buy-in, local government buy-in for taking a risk to improve the accessibility of government to the public?
That's a good question. It would depend so much on your council. I guess maybe a similar pitch to them as we just did to you, that you could reduce the amount of hostility and anger. I mean, they too only hear from the angry people. So consultation professionals experience this all the time, where the first people to the mics are angry. But I've worked in counselors' offices, and I can tell you, the only people who phone us are the angry ones as well. So counselors always feel like, why am I doing this job? Everyone just phones me that the garbage wasn't picked up. If you're happy about a new development, or if your garbage does get picked up, no one's going to phone the counselor and say, hey, thanks. So they are also really invested in getting beyond this STP, cave people, usual suspects, and they have a cynicism towards the average voter. So I think it's asking them to take a leap of faith and experiment. And of course, as you know, the best way to get counselors to agree to anything is to call it a pilot.
Aha. Right. So dip your toe in the water.
And also to show precedence. So I find counselors are scared to try something new, but if you can say, hey, they did this in Minneapolis, it's working there, here is the data, can we try it as a pilot? That's a much easier pitch than, hey, we came up with this great idea we heard on a webinar, we want to do this. That's too much at once.
Right. Here's a question, seems more directed towards me. Dave, how long does it take to create a MetroQuest site, and how technical is it? I guess there's two ways to interpret that question. It only takes you could put a site up in a matter of a couple of hours, but usually it's a longer process because there's an internal decision-making process around content and questions and so forth. And so usually a couple of weeks of back and forth with depending on the decision-making environment. But in terms of the technical, it's adding pictures and changing words on screens and picking screens is a very simple and quick task. But getting approval internally about what the questions say and what the information is going to look like so you can be prepared it differs from case to case. So here's one, Dave, maybe you want to weigh in on it. Is there a strategy to overcome the perception from public participants who are nervous to testify because they feel they will be targeted by an applicant or other group in the community? It seems odd, but I hear this complaint quite often. So public participants who are nervous to come forward.
I guess two parts to that. One is to get them used to being at meetings in the first place, because if they're already nervous of even, can I open this door, as I told in my earlier story, then there's a heightened nervousness. So they'll feel more sensitive to everything. If they're already comfortable in the space, they're more likely to have a bit of resilience, because you might be targeted. I mean, part of getting involved politically is that the more you lead, the more feedback you get, both positive and negative. But second, it's so important to have these meetings facilitated by professionals, which I'm sure most of you are doing already. But getting people into the room is one thing. Having people in the room who are highly trained in how to de-escalate conflict and use humor to get people to start trusting each other. The comparison I almost make is to marriage counselors. Two people trying to get along with each other often need professional help to learn how to communicate with each other. If two people can't get along who love each other, it's insane to imagine you can throw 30, 40, 50 people into a room and say, hey, what do you think about a change in the neighborhood? And just on a side tangent, I think we should be doing this for councils as well. If two married people can't get along without professional help, why do we throw 10, 20, 30 people into a council chamber and say, hey, make decisions? They should have a full-time mediator, facilitator, social interaction, emotional intelligence trainer on site to help them get along with each other.
Right. And I want to echo that. And we in the past, in a past life, I used to do a lot of public meetings, and I just realized over time how vulnerable that format is to co-optation, and there is only so much you can do to keep that under control. You can design, people in tables to have discussions, and not have a mic in the center of the room, which seems like a terrible idea in that kind of environment. But people can still, stand up and dominate the room and influence people. And it is a very intimidating environment for the average person. And so I think creating alternatives for people, in addition to the public meeting, which can be very valuable for people to learn from each other and to hear what their neighbors are saying. But then if a group, an active group, wants to dominate a public meeting, it's not that difficult to get enough people there to just completely dismantle things. So there needs to be these alternatives.
Let me add one more thing here too. I'd really discourage you from ever just having an open mic where the participants select who speaks first. If you just have a microphone at the front of the room, the angriest people will get to it really fast. A good facilitator will pass the mic around, and there's ways of using eye contact and body language to figure out who came to just be angry and who came to listen and think and might have something constructive to say. So even though it might sound undemocratic, and I'm a democracy advocate, I think it's actually more democratic to have a trained professional allow the insecure, introverted people to have the microphone first, rather than those who have the most confidence and or the most anger.
Excellent. Yeah, great idea. And some of those ideas are in the guidebook that we're going to share with you after. And I know that Dave's book in the spring is going to have all kinds of good advice for people. So stay tuned for that. One other question we've got here, maybe we've got time for one more. I want to respect people's time. I know we've already gone 6 minutes over. How is the data, specifically with the financial exercises, aggregated and analyzed? So I guess this is a broader question about, the when you get a whole bunch of data, and we have with MetroQuest repeatedly, tens and tens of thousands of data points. It's important to make sure that the data is analyzable graphically, that you can put it on a map. It's getting 10,000 comments. I don't know how you summarize that in any meaningful way, but having quantitative information that is private to you as an agency allows you to interpret the data and dive into what are people from different demographics saying with this information. Now we sort of treat, those financial examples that I showed, we're not going to use those directly to make decisions. They're essentially a way for people to understand limitations and trade-offs and express their views on priorities. What you do with that priority information probably will be to dive into the data and slice and dice it by different demographics to understand the fabric of the opinions in your community, and then use that to make better decisions, and then give back to the community to say, here's what we heard about your priorities, and here's what we're doing about it. So closing that loop is so important, because essentially what both Dave Meslin and I are on about is trying to create a culture of engagement, a culture where you're rewarded for engaging and you're building up your civic voice. And the only way to do that is to attend something or participate in something and be made aware that you had an impact, that you changed something about your community. And that closing the loop is so powerful, because the next time you're asked to go and do something, you'll be far more likely than if your input just seemed to go into a vacuum where they decided to do something completely different and you just feel like you're being worn out. And so really being respectful of the attitudes of the public and rewarding them for participating, and making sure that you're only asking questions around which you have flexibility and you want community input, and you're willing to make adjustments in your plan according to what you hear from the community. So with that, I am going to say thank you so much to Dave Meslin for his presentation. I was looking forward to this so much. And I'm glad that so many people were able to join today. I want to remind people who are collecting AICP continuing education credits, there is the link. We will send you a follow-up email so you don't have to scribble down the link, but you can collect your credits there. Thanks again to Dave for his presentation. I'm really looking forward to the book. I really enjoyed hearing you over the years, and really thankful that your voice is out there inspiring people to think compassionately about the public and their needs, and creating an environment where participation is being rewarded. And thank you, all you folks that were able to join us today. Really appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.